So thank you all for attending today. I greatly appreciate it. This is our Principal Investigator Academy, and what's really great about being remote, we were actually able to open this up to the entire research team. So I'm very excited today for this presentation that Dr. Kleppinger is going to give to us. Just one housekeeping item. You were muted upon entry, so at the end, if you do have questions, you can definitely unmute yourself. We do ask that you wait till the end of the presentation to ask questions. Also, for attendance purposes, if you can place your name and email in the chat box, I would greatly appreciate it. If you would like continuing education credits, if you can place CE, if you're a WVU staff member, we are offering those today. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Dr. Sally Hodder.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thanks to all of our investigators who have joined today. I'm sorry that we aren't back to our sort of quarterly meetings with some good food, but hopefully by the end of the year, maybe we will be. I am really honored to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Cynthia Kleppinger, who is currently a senior medical officer in the Good Clinical Practice Assessment branch at the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. In this capacity, she directs and participates in on-site inspections of clinical investigator sponsors and CROs in collaboration with the FDA's field organization. What I find so amazing about Dr. Kleppinger's career is that it spans the practice of family and emergency medicine, academia, NIH, all prior to joining the FDA. Dr. Kleppinger served as a senior medical officer and project coordinator at the NIDA Center for Clinical Trials Network, and later she provided oversight for clinical trials as director of clinical safety in the Division of Intramural Research at NIAID. Subsequently, she served as a clinical reviewer in the FDA's Division of Vaccines and Related Products Applications, and after joining the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, she launched and oversaw the collaboration of the FDA European Medicines Agency Good Clinical Practice Initiative, as well as issues related to international standards development and harmonization. Given her wealth of experience, I can't think of a more qualified individual to speak to us on investigator responsibilities in FDA-regulated research. Welcome, Dr. Kleppinger.
Thank you for having me. If there's any issues, please let me know. I'm very pleased to be speaking today, and I do have my heart in West Virginia. I actually lived in Martinsburg for years and raised 2 children there, so just to let everybody know. So I'm going to try to do the share my screen, and I'll get my slides going here. Can you see my slides?
I can on my side.
Okie dokie. Okay. So I don't know if since I'm doing the slide view, I can't see anything else. So just to if someone in the chat, if there's a problem, if you can let me know, then okay.
Yeah,
I can't see the slides.
Did you hit, I'm assuming you hit share screen, right?
I'll end and do it again.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see here. Sorry, we were all set up.
It's okay. Technology is great when it works correctly.
You make me feel good. This happens to me every time.
Oh, I know. It's like, I hit the share screen.
Okay.
Let me try again because I can see the screen.
Okay. Debbie, do we have permission so that she can share?
Yes, I did. I promoted her earlier, and we did test before we started, but
right. Can you see this now?
No,
we're not seeing it on this end. So let me do this. I can actually share on my side for you, Dr. Kleppinger.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you see it now?
Oh.
No, we're just seeing.
What are you seeing exactly?
I'm actually just seeing just your video, just your face on my side.
Maybe I'll do. I'm sorry, everybody.
It's okay.
Yeah, we were just doing this and everything was fine.
Yeah.
Okay, share screen. One participant should share at a time. It says one participant can share at a time, maybe multiple participants? No?
Mm-mm. Yeah, because I'm not seeing anything shared on our. I tell you what, let me just go ahead and share on my side. I can definitely
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Let me just stop my video on my side. Give me 1 second just to switch gears here, everybody.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, it was working 2 seconds ago.
Well, you know, that's how technology works.
Or doesn't.
Or does it? And I'm like, I'm considered maybe, you know, kind of an expert in Zoom here. So there's that. So things.
Yeah.
Hey, we got your video to work. I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, we got the video to work.
Okay, can you guys see her slides now?
You can see them now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I see a shaking head, so I'm going to go with it. So go right ahead.
Yes. It
Oh,
looks,
what a shame. Okay, I'm going to minimize.
And tell me when to go to the next slide. So.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm going to try to minimize everybody so I don't see too much. Okay, can you see all that now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So again, sorry, go to the next slide. Again, I'm happy to be here. I have to do this disclaimer to let you know. Next slide, please. The focus of my talk, I was asked to have 3 objectives. The one is, first is responsibility of an investigator in a clinical trial. And my talk will include trials that are investigator initiated, industry sponsored, or involve cooperative research. My focus will be FDA regulated research. And since I represent the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at FDA, my talk will really focus on drug trials, not device or vaccine trials. Second, I was asked to discuss how to prepare for a successful regulatory inspection. My focus again will be FDA, but if it has not already happened to you, there is a possibility that your investigator site could be inspected by a foreign authority, such as the European Medicines Agency. As was mentioned earlier, I was heavily involved with them. And again, they do inspections and they could come to your site. So I've been involved with a lot of joint inspections. I know a lot of what they're expecting. So I will try to incorporate any additional preparation you may need for those agencies. And the third is I was asked to discuss some common deficiencies cited during FDA inspections and the possible enforcement actions that can happen. If you understand the first 2 objectives, I don't think you'll have any problem with the third. I'm also going to give you some references of interest, and we have some questions, some time at the end and some questions folks had sent. Next slide, please. So I would like to give a little background to kind of put us all on the same page. Our regulations have a definition for everything. So again, our definition of an investigator is an individual who actually conducts a clinical investigation. If there's a team of individuals, the investigator is responsible, leader of the team. I like to bring up the point that we do not use the term principal investigator or co-investigator in our regulations, although you may hear the terms used by other federal agencies such as the NIH. Now, your research team can use those terms if you want, but again, I want to let you know it's not in our regulations. One caveat, if you decide to have a co-investigator at your site, each one of those will have to fill out a statement of the investigator 1572, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Also, I'd like to let folks know that the investigator does not have to be a medical doctor. For a protocol, you can have a sub-investigator as the physician who performs all the functions requiring, medical decision-making, and that for a physician. So that's just to let you know. I've seen nurses, I've seen veterinary doctors. So again, our regs don't say you have to be a physician, but one has to be on the team. Next slide, please. So FDA regulations do not use the term investigator-initiated trials or investigator-initiated research, et cetera. Although you may see the terms even on our website, again, it's not in our regulations. If there is an investigator who conceives the research, develops a protocol, runs the trial, we have the term sponsor investigator. And our regulations, again, we have a definition for that. It's an individual who both initiates and conducts an investigation. It is one person. And it's very important to know that this person needs to follow the regulations of the sponsor and the investigator. Now, this independent investigator, they may have developed the investigational product themselves, or they could receive it from a pharmaceutical company, or even funding from a pharmaceutical company, or an academic institute, the government, et cetera. So, but again, that is the sponsor investigator. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So for FDA, as far as principal investigator, if you've got a multi-site trial run by one person that some folks call the principal investigator, again, that is still the sponsor investigator for us. And that person is responsible for all the actions of the other site investigators. Now, depending on the structure, you could call them sub-investigators. Again, it depends on what you want to do. But that being said, you will have all the responsibilities of a sponsor. You need to understand what's going on in all those trials. Now, you may want to hire a contract research organization. I do know there's some institutional review boards that require this if a sponsor investigator wants to run a multi-site trial. So again, you need to check with your IRB. These coordinating centers, they'll handle your data management, your monitoring, the communication between the sites, et cetera. But again, these are all responsibilities that are needed, and it's a huge job. So I just want to let folks know. Next. Now, I like to bring up the point and remind physicians who are anticipating to be an investigator in a clinical trial that you can be an excellent clinician and not do well as a clinical investigator. It is definitely a different role. It's a difficult role. I read recently that the amount of paperwork can be 40% more than just running a clinical practice. It is a lot of paperwork, a lot of documentation. The standards are called good clinical practice, but a lot of us say the term really should be good research practice. I do like to bring up the point that, again, it is a different hat you will be wearing. Next slide, please. Next, go one, then two. Oh, okay, just one. Thank you, sorry. I like to do this little diagram because I noticed when I talk to a lot of folks, there's a lot of confusion regarding clinical research. And so I like to kind of use this little diagram to kind of walk it through. So as the investigator, your first responsibility is to the subject. I can't stress that enough. When I was a reviewer in CBER, I bring up that there was a phase 1 trial, I remember, where the investigator stopped the trial on his own because he was giving the vaccine to several patients who were screaming out in pain because it was so painful. So he decided on his own, I'm not going to give that vaccine to anymore. And so again, that subject is your number one concern, and you will never get in trouble if you, in an emergency, do the right thing. So one tap. Next. So again, if you have an investigational product and it's regulated by the FDA, you have to follow all our regulations in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, I often tell folks that is the minimum you need to do. Folks tend to think it's the maximum. It's actually the minimum, and I can assure you that there are other requirements you're going to need above our regulations. So I like to bring that up. Next. So if you're a federal agency, such as the National Institutes of Health, or you receive federal funding or support, you must follow the regulations also in Title 45.46. It has 4 subparts. The one you will commonly hear is subpart A, which is the common rule. Now, again, this is in addition, if you've got an investigational product and you're getting government funding, you got to follow both these regulations. Again, it's always the strictest you'll need to follow. So if you're not regulated by us, the Office of Human Research Protections will regulate you. If you have medical product, we will be regulating you, but you have to follow their rules too. Now, we do have a revised common rule where we're trying with our regulations and OHRP to harmonize a little bit more to make it a little bit easier for you. But again, you got to know the regulations and you got to follow them. Next. So as you know, you need an institution review board. You'll have to follow their policies and procedures. So they're going to want more than what we even want. Certain documents they're going to want to review. They'll let you know the timing for unanticipated events that you need to send to them, etc. Extra training. I say, get to know your IRB members, get to know your IRB. They have been in research for a long time. If you have questions, ask them. But I would say develop a good relationship with your local IRB. Next. Then if you're part of an institution, you have to follow their policies and procedures. And again, there will often be more training. I give an example of one time there was a potential fraud involved with a graduate student. I was involved in this research, and the investigator was talking about it on a community phone call. And they have an Office of Research Integrity that he really should have reported to them. And the rules were you weren't to discuss it because this was potential. It was not confirmed. And there was a potential that people would find out who this graduate student was. So there was training regarding how to handle if you thought your staff could be potentially committing fraud. That investigator admitted he had not done the training. So he did not know the steps that needed to be taken and what not to do. And it became a big problem, needless to say. Next. And the last is the sponsor. Again, if you've signed the contract and you know the sponsor, it's their trial, you've got to follow what they want you to do. Now, we will often get questions, you know, was that in the regulations? Do your regulations say I have to do that? Or do I have to follow the sponsor's request? I would say yes. If you signed the contract and you said you were going to run the trial the way they wanted it run, then yes, like we don't have an example. We don't have a regulation for a delegation log, but every sponsor requires one. I mean, we say you can delegate and we want documentation, but we don't really say how you need to document. But that's just one small example of what is required by sponsors that we don't require. So you can see that this is the reason why I think a lot of folks get confused when they're in clinical research, because yes, one entity may not be requiring what another entity does. But remember, you've got to follow the strictest. So an example is like keeping your records, and I'll go into this later on, but there are some countries like Canada that require 25 years. So again, if we only require 2 and they require 25 and you're involved in a multinational trial, you'll be holding those records for 25 years. So just to kind of let you know, I'm hoping this will kind of help explain a little. Next. So I'm hoping all of you who are involved in clinical research have read this guidance from ICH E6. Again, it's fantastic. For the FDA, it's considered a guidance. However, for many countries, they've incorporated this into their laws. So, and therefore, most sponsors gear their protocols towards following ICH E6. So again, very important. If you haven't read it, to read it. There's also a section on investigator responsibilities. Next. Now, after 20 years, they have basically amended E6, and this amendment added definitions such as certified copies. We often get a lot of questions regarding that. Validation of computerized systems, electronic records, essential documents, quality management, risk-based monitoring. All this has been either added or expanded in this new version, and they've expanded the investigator responsibilities. Next. So so if you look at that section in ICH E6, some of these additions are that they wanted to stress that the investigator is responsible for supervising any individual or party to whom they've delegated. So again, also, if you retain services of any party, you got to ensure that they're qualified, that they know what they're doing. So look at the contracts, oversee. Again, this is what's stressed in the amendment. Next. Now we talk about what is needed for source records. And again, they stress this Alcoa plus a C. And your source documents should be attributable, which again, who wrote that note? Is it signed? Has to be legible. If it's not typed up, you have to make sure people can see it. Contemporaneous, which means it's happening during the same period of time. We've looked at audit trails and found out that information was put in a year or two later. It should be original. Again, no copy unless it's a certified copy. Has to be accurate and complete. Again, the changes should be traceable. You can't obscure the original entry, and they should be explained if necessary. And again, if you have electronic records, there should be an audit trail that we can look at. Again, the amendment makes this an explicit investigative responsibility. Even though you have a study coordinator probably or somebody else who may be doing, it's your ultimate responsibility to make sure that they're following this. Next. Now, I also like to remind investigators with all of this, you have to know the laws of your state. So an example I like to give is, what is the legal aid for consent to enroll in a clinical trial in your state? Next. The answer is, it depends on the jurisdiction where you're conducting the inspection. So certain states, military service, marriage, pregnancy, childbirth may allow them to consent and be of legal age when other states they wouldn't. So next. For FDA, our expectations are next that you adhere to the Code of Federal Regulations. So really, that is our main focus. Next. So if you're an investigator in one of our trials in a domestic site, you have to sign a statement of the investigator, Form FDA 1572. Again, no investigator can participate without signing this. Now, this is actually a contract between you and the sponsor, but it has to be signed, and during inspection, we have to make sure that you did it. Next. For those who may not have seen one, this is the front of it. Next. And this is the back of it. Now, what I've often wondered is how many investigators actually have read this 1572, because on the back is a commitment of what you're agreeing to do. Next. Now, I like to say to folks at the very bottom, it says a false statement is a criminal offense. So I stress that everyone who signs this form, you better make sure you've read it. Next. So we're going to go through what's exactly on the back of that form, that if you're doing FDA research, you've committed to personally conduct or supervise the investigation. You've committed to follow the protocol, only make changes after notifying the sponsor, again, unless it's an emergency and the subject is at risk. You're committing to ensure that all persons assisting in the study are informed of their obligations. That means all your staff, anyone involved, you got to make sure that they know what they're doing. You've got to inform subjects that the drugs are investigational. You've got to ensure that there's informed consent and IRB review. You've got to report adverse events to the sponsor. And the big one also is that you have read and you understand the investigator's brochure. I have noticed time and again that investigators haven't read the investigator's brochure. So again, you've committed that you're going to read it and you're going to understand it. Next. Further, it says that you're going to maintain adequate and accurate records and make them available for inspection. If you've agreed to do FDA regulated research, then we can inspect you. I mean, we've had folks refuse inspections, but you've said that no, you're going to be a part of our regulations, and that means that you can be inspected. That includes copying your records. I had a case when I was a medical monitor where I got a call from one of the nurses that the investigator being inspected wasn't allowing his records to be copied, and you can't not allow that. So just to let you know. So again, you've committed to ensure that there's initial and continuing review by an IRB, that you're going to report any changes to your research, that you're going to report unanticipated problems, and you're going to comply with other requirements. Next. Whoops. So I want to point out again, I like to let folks know about certain references. We have an excellent guidance with frequently asked questions regarding the statement of investigator. So if you have any questions, I suggest you go to this guidance. I think it's very good. Next. So who's in charge at the site? Next. The clinical investigators in charge and held accountable. So our regulations say that a sponsor can transfer the responsibilities to contract research organization, but we do not permit a clinical investigator to transfer their general responsibilities to a CRO or a site management organization, sub-investigators, or study staff. Again, you can delegate, but you can't transfer. And what that means that if they do anything wrong, you're held responsible. That's exactly what that means. Next. So these are our regulations for clinical investigator responsibilities. You'll see that it mirrors a lot of what's in that 1572, that you're agreeing that the investigation is conducted according to the signed investigator statement, the 1572, the plan, our regulations. You're going to protect the rights, safety, and welfare of subjects. You're going to control the drug. You're going to ensure informed consent. You're going to ensure IRB review and approval. Next. There's going to be record retention, keeping and retention. So you're going to maintain adequate records of the disposition of the drug. I've seen a lot of problems with sites regarding that they haven't kept track and written down exactly how much drug went out to the patients, how much drug came back, etc. You're going to need accurate case histories to record all observations and other pertinent data. And again, when we look at your records, we should be able to know exactly what happened during that trial. Next. So I mentioned before about retention of records. So our regs say, again, you've got to keep those records 2 years after the date of the marketing application, or 2 years after the sponsor decides they don't want to move it forward, or we decide it can't be marketed. So what I advise, though, is that do not destroy any records until the sponsor of the trial gives you permission. And I even say, look at your contract, because there's a very good chance the sponsor has also said that. Whoops, it just went backwards. Yeah, there, yes, yeah, okay. I also say, look at your contracts regarding payment for storage, because some sites have had to store records 10 years or even longer. And so they'll move them maybe to Iron Mountain or somewhere. So I just kind of want to say to investigators, if you're involved in trials where there's a sponsor, you may want to also check with that, because sometimes you'll have to retain those records for a very long time. Next. There are responsibilities regarding reports. Again, you need progress reports to sponsors. And again, they send us annual reports, so they need information from you. The safety reports, I'm sure you're all familiar with the serious adverse events that need to be sent immediately to the sponsor. And you also need to give them assessment of whether you think it may be, the drug may have caused it or not. The sponsor then makes the final assessment and sends us an IND safety report. Again, you got to also send them non-serious adverse events and report them per the protocol. Next. So you need to send a final report to the sponsor, and you also need to let them know about financial disclosure. They will have you fill out forms. And what I say to investigators is you have the right to be paid for your work. And so that is not part of what this is about. What this is about is honorariums, grants, stock. Again, this also is not just with you, but it's your spouse and it's your dependent children. It also means you can't own stock, but we just need to be transparent. And so we need to know about it. So next. We have an excellent, as always, guidance on this. If you have any questions regarding financial disclosure, it tells you the limits, owning stock in a public versus private company, etc. So again, a very good guidance to read. Next. I also like to bring up the clinicaltrials.gov. Most investigators don't need to deal with this. The sponsor is the responsible party in most of the trials that we see at the FDA, but they may actually designate a principal investigator to do this. Now, I say to folks that you can only be designated if you, as the principal investigator, are responsible for the trial, you have access and control over the data, you have the right to publish the results of the trial, and you have the ability to meet all the requirements for the submission of the clinical trial information. This is an extremely big job. If you're a sponsor investigator, it is your job. But I would say if you're involved with the trial with a sponsor, make it very clear what will your responsibilities be if they say that you're going to be designated the person doing this, because it is a big responsibility. Next, what I like to point out, which a lot of folks know, is we have a final rule that there are penalties relating to not putting this information in clinicaltrials.gov. So again, it has to be within 1 year after completion date of the trial. And that is, by definition, the date of final data collection for the primary outcome measure. And again, there are civil penalties if the regulations aren't followed. Next. We have an excellent reference I always like to bring up too about investigator responsibilities. And it outlines our expectations for delegation of study tasks, training of study staff, supervision, and oversight of third parties. What I'd like to really stress upon investigators, if you're hired by what's called a site management organization, they will often tell investigators, oh, we'll take care of that. We'll hire your study coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. The investigator often doesn't have a lot of say in the study coordinator being hired. We will go and do an inspection and there will be problems. And the investigator will say to us, well, the site management organization said they were going to submit it to the IRB, or the site management organization was supervising the study coordinator. It's a big problem because we don't have a definition of site management organization in our regulations. There is no such thing in our regulations. As I mentioned before, you can't transfer. So if you're hired by a site management organization, you have to be sure that you're overseeing everything. And if there's a problem and you think there are some activities that you're not comfortable with, you may want not only to discuss with them, but potentially move on, because you will be held responsible if we do an inspection and there's been some issues and problems. Next. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this much, but just for those who are sponsor investigators, here are some of the responsibilities. The big one I want to point to is the ensuring proper monitoring. This is often a problem we see with sponsor investigators. They don't monitor the trial like they should. And then also it's very difficult to maintain an effective IND. So again, it can be done. We have plenty of sponsor investigators, but it is a big job. Next. We have a lot of great references and websites and materials for sponsor investigators. Here's one reference for you. Next. We have a nice guidance on preparing your IND if you're a sponsor investigator. Next. Again, we have a great website which has a lot of information if you're a sponsor investigator submitting an IND. Again, it's a big job. Next. So let's look at some common mistakes, risk factors for noncompliance. What we see a lot when we go out and inspect is poor supervision and training of study staff. I would say that's a big one. And then also insufficient investigator involvement in study conduct. We've seen an investigator will be gone for weeks when we look on their calendar. So when we question them, it's obvious that they weren't quite sure what was going on during the study. So again, you have to be on top of everything. You have to be supervising. Also, we see a lot of inappropriate delegation of study tasks to unqualified persons, especially we're seeing medical type decisions being made by folks who don't have a clinical background. So again, you can't have somebody who again, is not a nurse or a physician or somebody with a clinical background making those type of decisions, such as adverse event, dealing with adverse event reporting. So again, failure to adequately protect study subjects. Again, it's such things as the protocol where if there's a certain lab result, the drug was supposed to be decrease the dose and it's not done. So we see instances like that. So see a lot of overworked investigators and study staff, too many subjects, complex study with large data collection, and also too many concurrent studies going on. Again, remember, it is your responsibility as the investigator to train your staff, even if the sponsor offers training, and push for additional training of your staff if needed. Next. What you don't want to do, and we see a lot of this, forget to obtain IRB approval of consent form revisions. We've seen that. Revise the protocol without obtaining the sponsor's written concurrence. Again, we've seen where investigators have told us clinically he would do this or she would do this. Well, if it doesn't follow the protocol, you can't do it. So again, you should not use your study staff as subjects in a study if they do not have the conditions under investigation. Folks have asked me, can they have their friends and family enrolled in a study? I would say our regs don't say you can't. I would not encourage it. Definitely they can't be part of the study. They can't be your study coordinator also enrolling. But technically, as long as the person, a family or friend has the condition under investigation, technically you can enroll them. So, but again, think twice about doing that. And a big thing is don't destroy study records. We've seen where sites wanted to, quote, clean up their records. They had written records and decided they want to type them up and they destroyed the written records. You can't do that. So please do not destroy study records. Next. As I say to folks, it is your staff that often will get you into trouble. I always like to mention this older article that came out years ago. The authors interviewed 39 clinical trial staff that were investigated for scientific misconduct. I think we can all learn from others' mistakes. Next. What the authors found out that the motivation for fraud and misconduct was job retention and productivity. That is to say, the staff were worried about losing their jobs, or the motivation was the ability to earn extra money, typically involving the use of payment incentives for subject recruitment. So I was involved with one study where basically the staff was supposed to call subjects and record all the attempts that they were calling them. And the staff person wanted some overtime and they had to justify it. So basically they pretended they had made all these calls to subjects that they did not make. So another study I'm aware of is that the study coordinator drew blood from one subject and then divided it up to make it look like she saw 3 subjects. So again, this does happen. And again, you know, ultimately it's your responsibility if they do something like that. So they did say in this article that there were 3 general types of deficiencies noted. And in these cases, that was with management, supervision, and training. Next. So regarding deficiencies in management, they saw repeatedly over delegation of responsibilities to staff that were asked to do tasks that they were neither qualified or trained to do. And as can be said in many situations, there was an overwhelming workload. I've been asked how many trials should an investigator run at one time, and I say there's really no set number. It really depends on the type of trial, the enrollment rate, the number of subjects in each trial, the number of trial visits, the stage of the trial, etc. I think the bottom line is if you're an investigator and you have staff, you need to let them know to let you know if they feel overwhelmed. Again, the more open and honest everybody is, the better it's going to be for everybody. So if you're approachable and you let me know if you feel overwhelmed, I don't think you're going to run into these problems. Next. So ensuring high quality data and subject safety, what do you need to do? Again, select qualified staff and ensure adequate training. I always give the case where we saw not going well at a site, found out that the study coordinator that the investigator hired had been, her previous job was HR at Walmart. And then prior to that was a legal secretary in the law office, had no clinical experience at all. You can imagine that site got a warning letter. There were so many issues and problems. So again, you have to hire folks that are qualified. So I always say to folks, have a disaster plan. Staff turnover is big, and think about that. What would you do if suddenly you lost your prize study coordinator? And again, I remember telling my one staff, I wanted to write stuff down saying you could be hit by a bus tomorrow. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. So, you know, prepare as much as you can. We can't prepare for everything, but again, have a disaster plan. I'm really big about doing beta testing and dry runs. So if you're part of a study and it hasn't started yet, you may want to run through at your site, you know, where the subject comes in, where would they be, what would they be doing. I remember we did a beta testing one time where we were using drug and behavior modification and realized that the patient was walking down the hall to the behavior mod, and the investigator staff would see that. And so they'd know that they were in that arm for the behavior modification. It's something that simple sometimes. So again, I do recommend that. Also, very important to have weekly team meetings and calls. Doesn't even have to be more than 10 minutes if there's nothing else really to discuss, but just having touching base really makes a difference, and that trial will be run so much better at your site. Even before your site starts with the research, if you've been a sponsor has come to you, really assess your ability to comply with the protocol. Look at your laboratory testing, your electronic system for data capture, your archiving and transmission of data to the sponsor, maintaining your records, your drug accountability. Are you prepared for inspections by the FDA? Again, do this up front, do this during the trial too, and then you're not going to run into some problems. Next. So you should implement systems to detect and correct error. So again, do real-time cleaning of your data. Look at your data. Pay attention to those monitoring queries if you're being monitored by a sponsor, and respond promptly. What I say to folks is that, you know, staff leave, patients drop out, patients die, whatever. If you haven't collected that data, it's gone. And so it's very important that you be really good about, you know, putting that data in real time, not only on the source record, but then into your case report form. Again, you need to have that audit trail to show the changes. And again, what's important is why it was changed. And what I say to folks is no site is perfect. I've never inspected a site where everything was perfect. It just doesn't happen. Human errors occur. What I say to folks is that document it, and then as investigators, step back. Was it just a human error where they wrote the wrong number in? Or was there a system-wide problem? Or do you have other, was this a repeated error? Were there other staff making the same error? It may point to that there needs to be more training or something else corrected. So again, step back, do a root cause analysis and see what is the reason for that error. Next. So improving your process, assist on training and then refresh. I always like to give the story too when I was at inspection, and a very difficult protocol. And I've read some protocols that I couldn't understand. I had to read them several times. And this investigator obviously had some issues during the study, couldn't understand some stuff. And I said to him, I said, look, if you're not understanding the protocol, I can guarantee you a lot of the other investigators aren't understanding it either. And again, folks running trials, you know, we're all not stupid. And 2 days later, I was still at the site, and he came back and said, you know, I am involved in another trial where I also had a problem. And I contacted the sponsor, and now the trial is on pause. And it appeared that the sponsor reached out to some other investigators who also couldn't understand. And they paused the trial for a while to clarify, you know, maybe rewrite it. But the point being is that if there's something you don't understand the protocol, definitely let the sponsor know. Again, we're real big on SOPs. You got to write down all procedures. It's good for you. It's good, again, if staff tends to leave, so you know what's going on. Nothing's wrong with using a checklist. Some of the best sites I've seen, they'll have a little checklist up for the visits and what needs to be done at each visit. So I'm really big on auditing yourself. Be open and honest. I've told folks, you want to find your problems before we find your problems. So again, if you have a QA department, you may say to them, I'd like you to audit me. I know when I was director of a safety office, I asked our QA staff to audit me. I want to know what I don't know. I want to know if there's, room for improvement. So there's nothing wrong with looking within yourself and being open and honest, and then making the corrections so that by the time we're there, everything's looking good. Again, I want to bring up, think very careful. If you're in doing a randomized double-blind study, think very carefully about unblinding procedures. We've seen many examples of errors. Next. So if a code break should occur, it should be an exceptional circumstance. So if you need to unblind, if it's deemed to be necessary, use the system for emergency unblinding, use what the sponsor has said and what's in the protocol. But if you have to unblind for emergency unblinding, the actual allocation of that subject should not be disclosed to the patient or other study personnel, including other site personnel. Do not disclose it to monitors if they're coming to your site, to the sponsor or the project office staff. Again, we've seen this error several times. There should be no written or verbal disclosure of the code and any of the corresponding subject documents. And if you need to do an emergency code break, and then report it to the sponsor. And that also includes if there's been accidental unblinding. That does happen at sites with staff, et cetera. So let the sponsor know. We at FDA assumes the sponsor will know the code break when it happens, but that doesn't always occur. But the point being, this is a problem we see a lot in randomized double-blind trials. So please remember this. Next. So now preparing for an inspection. So most FDA inspections start with a phone call from the FDA inspector. Hopefully, however, you've been told by the sponsor that they've submitted their marketing application and you've been given a heads up, because if that happens, any site can be inspected while that application is in-house. So again, be prepared here. So you don't want to be surprise. When you get the call, let the sponsor or the contract research organization who's ever been providing monitoring oversight, let them know that you got the call from the FDA. Many times they will offer to send staff to your site. I suggest you allow them to come. I've actually seen some sites where they didn't want them to come, but these are folks that have been involved with, I'm sure, hundreds of FDA inspections. They will often come and make sure that your files are in order. Again, you should usually get about 3 to 5 leadway time before we show up, so call them immediately. Now, there are exceptions. If we've heard a complaint about your site, or if a sponsor has closed your site prematurely for poor performance, we won't give you a heads up. We will just show up at your door. So you hope you get the phone call from us. So anyway, most of the time the trial has long ended. A good chance you have your study files actually in storage. So make sure you're aware of where those files are at all times and that you can access them quickly within a reasonable amount of time. If it's been several years, which I mentioned before happens a lot, refresh yourself with the protocol and the study and what went on during the trial, because you will be asked questions by the FDA inspector. You really want that. We feel more comfortable if it seems like you know what's been going on. Also, make sure that your staff have also been refreshed regarding the trial if it's been a while. So, and if possible, make sure that you have your study staff, sub-investigator coordinators available for FDA to ask questions. Okay, so if there's any deficiencies, try to correct them while you're there. So for an example, if a regulatory document is missing, your IRB or the sponsor may have it, and call them and ask to have a copy sent. So if you can correct something while that investigator is there, then there's often a chance that you won't get a citation. Again, block off time at the beginning and the end of the day for discussion with the inspector. They will often let you know how the inspection's going. They will have questions to ask of you. Just make sure we know you're very busy and you don't need to be there the whole time, but it's very good, especially at the end of the day before the inspector leaves, that you're there to see how things are going. Now, again, as I mentioned, we do make copies, have a copier available. If you have electronic records, we often will be asking for a copy of those via a USB stick. Next. So the inspection ends and there'll be a closeout, and if everything looks good, the inspector will say thank you, and that'll be it. However, if there were observations that they noticed during the inspection, you will get, I'm sure many of you've heard of it, a Form FDA 483, and it will list the observations that they found. So again, the regs don't say you need to respond to this. However, we highly recommend that you do. And if you respond within 15 business days, that response will be considered regarding what activities we will do next. So I highly advise that you do respond. Now, we have a whole talks on responses, and really your response should address the citation. We're looking for corrective actions, and we're also looking for preventive actions. I've seen where investigators have said, I'm going to do training, or I'm going to, no, we actually want to see the training and that it's, if possible, that it's been done. So again, your response will be taken into consideration regarding what comes next. Next. So what is the number one deficiency that FDA inspectors find at an investigator's site? Next. It's not following the protocol. That is by far number one. So it's very important, like I mentioned before, that you read and understand the protocol. Next. Now, before I get into this, I just want to mention too, some folks ask about protocol waivers. Now, if you're doing such as inclusion, exclusion, you've got a subject that doesn't quite fit the inclusion criteria, but is close. Some investigators will call the sponsor and see if they can get what's called a protocol waiver, and they'll talk often with the medical monitor. Our regulations are silent regarding protocol waivers. So again, it's not against our regulations. However, the other foreign regulatory agencies do not allow protocol waivers. There's also many divisions at the NIH, like CTEP, that no longer allow protocol waivers. So what I'm saying is even sponsors have policies where they no longer allow protocol waivers, partially, I think, because of the other foreign regulatory agencies. So I would suggest you never ask for one. You can, and again, you won't be cited by us if you've got documentation that the sponsor approved it before it was done. I mean, you can enroll somebody and then ask for a protocol waiver after the fact, but again, just be cautious regarding that. So I mentioned about the deficiencies. This year, the past 2020, as you know, we had the pandemic and we did not do as many inspections as we had done 2019. We had almost 600. So we did 280 domestic and 99 foreign. A lot of our foreign we were unable to do, and most of these inspections were done before April. As you can see, the deficiencies match what I said. Protocol is cited, not found the protocol, number one. Record keeping, number two. For domestic, drug accountability, and for foreign, the same. And then consent and adverse events, not as much. Next. So this is a great reference. You can go up to our website. You can look at spreadsheets summarizing the 483s that were generated and examples of inspectional observations. Next. We actually, and we're the only regulatory agency I know that we post the results of our inspections. We classify them: no action indicated, voluntary action indicated, or official action indicated. And again, that will be posted on our website. You can go there and see. Next. So as far as regulatory actions, again, if you get a 483, I highly recommend that you respond in a timely manner and appropriately. If you do respond, it's not appropriate, or you don't respond at all, and we feel that these are significant violations, you will get what's called a warning letter. Occasionally will be an untitled letter, which is just a little below that, but a warning letter. And that basically says you need to correct what our inspector saw, or we're going to move forward with a further action. So again, you need to respond to that warning letter. This is posted on our website. Again, I think we're the only regulatory agency that does this. And if it's insufficient, we will move forward to what we call a NITPO, which is a notice of initiation of disqualification proceedings and opportunity to explain. You will go before a judge and you will explain why you don't think you should be disqualified. At the end of the day, you may get disqualified. And what that means is that you cannot receive any investigational product. So you could work for the sponsor as maybe a medical monitor, but you cannot be a site investigator in one of our trials. Now, if we see fraud or some other criminal activity, we will refer it to our Office of Criminal Investigations. If they feel that fraud was committed, you can be debarred. And what that means is you can't do any FDA regulated research. You can't be involved at all. So you couldn't be a medical monitor on a trial. I tell folks you can't even be a janitor at the sponsor's building. So we don't see much of this, but it does occur. Next. We have references. Again, everything's on our website. There's warning letters. I tell folks it's a great teaching tool to read them. We also have a manual, and there's a section on warning letters and what we do and what happens. And again, if you want to read more about it, there's the website. Next. We list our disqualified investigators and the proceedings that are taking place. And again, you can look on the website and see that. Next. And we have our debarment list, and we do require sponsors to look at that to make sure that they're not using an investigator in their trials that has been disbarred. Next. So in summary, the key message I'd like to say to everybody is clinical investigators play a critical role in ensuring high quality studies. Again, good care of patients is not the same as good clinical practice and research. Please remember that. You got to make sure all your staff have a clear understanding of responsibilities under our regulations. At stake is public confidence and participation, clinical trials, and ultimately the availability of safe and effective products. Again, it's a very difficult job. I appreciate every investigator out there who's doing it. So next, I like to bring up sites of interest. We have a good clinical practice, clinical trial website, which I think is excellent. We have a basics for industry that discusses a lot of our regulations. Also, you can't be up to date on everything. So even I have signed up for the FDA updates. You can put which FDA part you want to be updated about, maybe devices, investigational drugs, vaccines, whatever, guidances, like what's the latest guidance that just got posted. So I suggest if you want to go to the site and sign up for some of our updates. Next. This I love. We actually have a good clinical practice office, and you can send them an email and they will answer questions that you have. They then will post questions and answers. It's redacted, so no one knows it's you. And they're in folders by subject. And again, this is a great teaching tool. I've used it in past jobs for my staff. And again, it's also a great resource if you have any questions that you can't get answered. Next. And again, we have a information sheet on inspections of clinical investigators you may want to take a look at. And as I mentioned before, our guidance on investigator responsibilities. Next. And we have a lot of general information sheets about charging for investigational products, recruiting study subjects, etc. So again, there's a lot of reference material out there. Next. Thank you for your time and attention. And I'm going to go next into, we're going to have time for questions, I think, but I'm going to go to the questions that were initially asked. I asked for a few questions to kind of get us started. So the first question is, how has the pandemic changed the FDA bioresearch monitoring operations? Well, as you know, there have been a lot of travel restrictions. So our foreign site inspections have dropped dramatically, as I had mentioned. Even our domestic ones, especially in red zones, they're still not doing. And it was a combination of sites maybe closing or pausing their research. We actually had sites that didn't want us to come because of their fear of having folks at their site. So it's been very upended. So we have had to use alternative assessment instruments, and we've done a few of what we call remote regulatory assessments, especially with some of the foreign sites where we ask the site to send us remotely certain study records. So we have done that. It's been quite difficult, but it has been done. We've worked with sponsors to get a hold of monitoring reports and other things to try to make assessments, but we have been affected. There have been some backlogs that have developed, and we've tried not to delay approvals, but some applications there have been some delays of approvals because we've been unable to inspect. So we also have a lot of guidances regarding the pandemic, and I bring up this one here, which is the conduct of clinical trials during this pandemic. And we started writing it right when it came out, and we've been updating. Our last one was late July of this year. So this is an excellent guidance document. We have several others, but I point to this one you may be interested in reading, because we talk about our flexibility of running trials during the pandemic. We know it's been difficult. Next. Second question, are there differences in regulatory expectations for industry-sponsored trials as compared to sponsored investigator trials? No, what I mentioned before, it's the same regulations, it's the same expectations. So that's the easy answer. Next. Have any notices of noncompliance in relation to clinicaltrials.gov been issued following the FDA guidance issued in 2020? So I actually checked with my staff as of yesterday, and no. Again, what we have sent out are preliminary notices of noncompliance, what we call pre-notices, and we've sent a lot of those out that allow the recipient 30 days to correct the potential violation. So vast majority of them, that has occurred. So if they fail to come into compliance, then our next step is to issue our notice of noncompliance. They get 30 more days to answer that. Bottom line is they'll then start being fined. But we will be posting notices of noncompliance up on our website. And I will say this is moving forward, and you should see some shortly. Next. Would it be possible to share any new FDA GCP related efforts or guidance documents expected to be issued shortly? Actually, we publicly post everything we'll be doing every year. So for 2021, I put the link here, and it lists all the CEDAR guidances that we're currently working on that should be coming out by the end of the year. I also gave Debbie a list for CBER. Those is not quite as many. And I pulled out a few you may be interested in keeping an eye on. We have one for decentralized clinical trials, multiple endpoints in clinical trials, investigator responsibility, especially safety reporting of investigational drugs, use of digital health technologies for remote data acquisition and clinical investigation. So there's a few that you may want, again, keep your eye open for, because they should be coming out by the end of the year. Next. Is Form FDA 3674 required for a research IND not intended for commercial purposes and accompanying clinical trial? Yes, because it certifies whether you know about clinicaltrials.gov. So this does apply. We have a lot of forms you got to fill out when you send in stuff. You can imagine us keeping track of billions of documents. Anyway, this applies to investigation of drug applications, so INDs, and submission of new protocols to INDs, as well as new drug applications, biological license applications, etc. Next, because I wanted to list what you're not required. It's not required for like single patient INDs, emergency INDs, treatment INDs, etc. So next. If the form is required, will this trial need to be registered? Well, if it's a phase 1, no. But remember, if it's an applicable trial, yes, it will need to be registered. Are there any guidances for non-IND studies? You know, there's a lot out there. The Office for Human Research Protections has many guidances. If you want to go to their website, the NIH Office of Clinical Research has a training site with a lot of guidances. So there is a lot out there. There's a lot of free training. NIAID even offers free training. So yeah, they're out there. And again, a lot of them, I think the issue is policies more than the regulations, because I think, you know, if you follow ICHE 6 for non-IND studies and you follow the protocol, I think you're going to do okay. But again, there is a lot out there. Anyway, next, this is all for the questions that were sent in. I'm going to, you want to, let me start my video maybe. Okay, there we go. And I'm open for any questions. I see there's like 44 in the chat here. I don't know, have anyone been looking to see, are there questions in here?
Yes, I've actually been doing that, Cynthia.
Oh, thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, no problem. And I actually haven't received any questions via the chat. I apologize. Those are people letting me know for attendance purposes.
Okay, no problem. Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody that does have a question? You're welcome to take yourself off of mute and ask her a question.
David, this is Ali Karshnas. I mean, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Really learned a lot and enjoyed it. A quick question for you. Knowing how the emergency use authorization has played a major role in approving novel therapeutics and diagnostics, do you anticipate the EUA process to continue from the FDA's perspective?
Personally, with 3 vaccines, I don't think it's going to, this is just my personal opinion, that's going to, once the emergency isn't there, there's no need for it. So I have a feeling it's not going to continue a lot longer, but that's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Just on that question, what do you think FDA has learned during the EUA process in terms of its rapid response, focus on certain unmet needs? Do you feel that there have been some learning from the FDA's perspective to look at the whole, drug approval or diagnostic approval from a larger viewfinder in making the regulatory barriers a bit less than what they are?
Yes, but in all honesty, I think we were moving in that direction. As I mentioned, this decentralized clinical trial guidance has been, there's been a working group for a while. Remote monitoring has been out for a while. I mean, we've been moving in the direction, and we've been working with the sponsors with Transcelerate and clinical trials initiatives to try to make it easier. I mean, it's also what people don't understand is I can't tell you how hard the staff worked with those emergency use orders. That we had folks literally working midnight, weekends. It's a lot of material. I mean, when you look at an application just in general, I mean, it's thousands of pages of data to go through. And and they'll have numerous ones. So I think there's no way to keep up a pace quite like the emergency use orders. I mean, that's number one. We cannot expect that things are going to turn over that quickly because it really has been a nightmare for some of the staff. But we have been trying, as you know, we have breakthrough therapies. We've decreased with PDUFA, we've shortened the approval timeline for a lot of products. So with anything, I think we all learn. So yes, I mean, I think, you know, staff has learned. I think we've understood some flexibilities are acceptable and there's been no problems. And so, yeah, but I just, in a way, I don't think the public realizes what it's taken to get these approvals done. And I applaud the staff that has worked on them, in all honesty. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
I would just like to thank Dr. Kleppinger. I think this has just been really enlightening. And I've been in clinical trials for 35 years and I learned stuff. So
we all do. We all do. That's what's interesting. We all do constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it just points out to how important this is. And we really appreciate your coming and we hope to have you back sometimes. This has been terrific. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy. I've really enjoyed it. And you know, sorry I can't be there in person. I know it's a little difficult remotely. So but yeah, I always say no question is a dumb question. I'm still learning. I mean, it's just never ending, really.
Yeah.
So I appreciate all your time and attention. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks again to everyone who attended. I'm sure that everybody learned something. So take care.
Okay, you too. Stay safe.
Thank you all. Thanks for staying over too. Appreciate it.